going to go back to your book, My Turn on the Fire Lines, a 22-year Manhattan firefighting journey from 1980 to 2003 by Captain Richard A. Mio, who is joining me today, and I'm going to read a portion of this. A crowd filled the auditorium at the Fire Department of New York training facility on Randall's Island. In the front rows were all of the young inductees. Family and friends filled the rest of the seats and aisles. An officer had us raise our right hands and take the oath of office. The grizzled old veteran firefighters stood up to the podium. You are now members of a military unit, but you fight a war that never ends. Fire has been an enemy to mankind throughout all of history. No one can stop it. Not the Army, not the Navy, not the police. No one can but us. This is your turn to become part of the best fire service in the world. You join a department that has an incredible history of saving lives and property. Our work will test you to the depths of your soul. The FDNY operates on the premise of an aggressive interior attack. The most effective way to save lives is by getting to the fire quickly from the inside. However, this method exposes you to the greatest risk. You must and will go into the dragon's den. You will work, suffer, live, and grieve together. As a result, you will socialize mostly with other firefighting families. This is not just a career, it's a calling. You will become brothers in war. You will fight many battles, and you will suffer many losses. Look around at your classmates. When it's time for your retirement, 20% of you will not be here. Truer words have never been spoken. And later on, you go on and you speak with some of the old war horses. Forget about your romantic ideals of firefighting. This is going to be a long, hard road. You will be wet, cold, hungry, thirsty, and covered in smoke and soot. You will see, smell, and hear horrible things. You will be afraid, and oh yes, you will learn about fear. You have to deal with impossible situations and come up with instant solutions. The helpless civilians will depend on us. Each of you will depend on the next brother. Your training will be tough, but fair. Report here at 0700 hours Monday. Dismissed. And as I said earlier, that book, that is the introduction to My Turn on the Fire Lines by Captain Richard A. Mio, who joins us here today. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Tell me about what was going through your mind can you recall what was going through your mind, what you were thinking as all this was going on in 1980?
Well, our class was the youngest class in the history of the fire department. There was a delay in the hiring because of a lawsuit for the women to get into the fire department. And so we were all the young kids who had been passed over and were waiting to get in. So now our chance came up, and we were very glad to finally get in. Listening to the old warhorse guys up there definitely put a crimp in your sails, because they were pretty adamant that this was going to be a really tough occupation. There was not going to be room for any slackers. You were going to have to perform, and you were going to have to be at 100% all the time. Most of those guys had been in what was called the war years of the FDNY from 1959 to 1979. And at its peak, the companies were doing 9,000 calls a year.
Mm-hmm.
There were so many fires in the city of New York in the 70s that at times there was nobody available to respond to them. That's how busy New York was back in those days.
Yeah, I remember you writing that they missed at one point, at its height, they missed 100,000 calls.
Yeah,
across the city.
The city tried to reduce the the number of calls. It used to be a pull box on every corner, and they started to modernize them. They went to what was called an ERS, emergency reporting system, and the box had two buttons, one for police, one for fire. Most of the time, they called the fire department. Nobody wanted to call the police because they never showed up. The fire department always showed up. So what happened with the new system is you hit the button, the dispatcher would ask you, "What's up?" If they didn't like the answer they got, they wouldn't transmit the call. So there was, I believe, 180,000 calls like that went unanswered because the dispatchers were convinced it was just kids playing a prank, and they wouldn't send it. And usually they were right. I would say 99% of the time they were right. Occasionally they'd have a miss where there was something going on, and that would usually get followed up by a phone call. So if they got a phone call on that box, they would be like, "Oops," and then they would tell the companies responding, "This was followed up with an ERS box pull, so something's going on." And you hustle a little bit harder to get to the box. Most of the heavy hitting from the 70s had ended when I got in, and with the ERS reporting system, the number of calls fell quite a bit. They had what was called second sections.
Hmm.
So you'd have like ladder 26 up in Harlem. There was a second section of ladder 26, and both companies would be doing 7,000 to 9,000 calls each. And there was probably 30 or 40 companies in the city that had second sections.
Wow.
That's how insane everything was back in the 70s. The 60s was the build up, and then when Martin Luther King was killed, that's when everything hit the fan, and it was just nonstop fires, and running and civil unrest and all kinds of crazy stuff. If you ever get a chance, there's a video out called "Bushwick is Burning." That happened in the summer of '77, and it was really, really hot that summer. And the people in Bushwick, some arsonists decided to light up an old factory, and that set off 40 buildings. And within a few days, they had a blackout, and they lost like 400 buildings. I mean, they were just burning everything you could believe. Just crazy. And those were the guys that were breaking us in 1980.
And because they had seen a lot and they had done a lot, they knew all the little. They had seen all kinds of tricks. They had seen arsonists and everything.
Yep. And it was good that we had them as the teachers, and mentors and instructors. And the worst day in the fire department was prior to 9/11 was 1966 at a store fire on 23rd Street, and they had a floor collapse, and 12 guys fell into the fire.
Wow.
And died. And 3 of the guys that broke me in survived that fire.
Wow.
Yeah. 3 of the guys in ladder 3. And when I got on, you had to go to probie school, and at the time it was 7 weeks, and you went through all your different evolutions, raising ladders, stretching hose lines, up fire escapes, down fire escapes, whatever they could think of. And when we were due to get out of probie school, the commissioner showed up, and he goes, "You're going to fire prevention." Everybody was about ready to riot, and he couldn't believe it. He's like, "It's a cushy job." And none of us young kids wanted cushy jobs. We wanted to get out and,
Get dirty.
fight the devil. Yeah. So he thought that was pretty crazy. He goes, "All right, so the next class is coming in. As soon as they're finished, they'll relieve you, and you guys can go into the field. So we got held up for 7 extra weeks doing fire prevention. People get permits for anything in the city of New York. So oil burner permit. If you're a welder, you have to have a fire department permit. So things like that needed to be inspected. And because of the cutbacks from the financial crisis in the city, none of that was getting done. And there was piles of money that were waiting to be collected, but you had to go inspect and sign off. And then the occupant would give you the check, or they would send it to fire prevention. So the city realized that they were losing a lot of money, so they sent us out to do these inspections. I got assigned to the district office in Lower Manhattan, and the guys that were there, most of them were older. They had been in the war years, and they were tired, so they took a job in fire prevention. I remember there was one younger guy, big, strong guy. He had gotten caught in a collapse and was buried, and took a while to get him out, and he couldn't go back into the buildings. So they put him in fire prevention so that he could keep working. And we had this old lieutenant, got on in like the 40s or something, early 50s.
Wow.
And he was really calm and relaxed. He's like, all right, kids, this is what you got to do. Stay out of trouble. If you're on probation, union can't help you. You're on probation. It's a year. So if you guys screw up, you're going to be fired. And basically he told us, learn as much as you can while you're here. Check out the buildings, and I listened to him. So every chance I got, when we went into a crazy building, I would nose around, and I saw the first elevator system in New York City. It was powered by water, and they had a pump, and it would pump water into the tube, and that's what raised the elevator. I saw boilers, because we were doing oil burner permits, that were built for battleships. Mm-hmm. These things were as huge as a house in these cellars and sub-cellars of these big commercial buildings. And the engineers would talk you through it. This is what you have to do to keep this running. And I thought it was fantastic. Hidden subway stations, like certain buildings had their own subway station. And nobody knew that. It was for the big mucky bucks. And they had a private train that would drive through the city and drop them off. And they didn't have to deal with all of the, the lesser mortals. But, nobody knew that at the time. That was all hidden. So it was interesting. Probie school was kind of tough. They had a procedure where you duck walk. They don't want you on your knees. They want you on duck walking, because we had the rubber boots at that time, and there was no padding. So if you got a burn through the hot floor, there's no skin on your knees. So it would take a long time for you to get, better, if ever. So they taught you to duck walk. And it was really tough. It was really tough. Trying to squat your way across the floor to put this damn fire out, and you're bumping into things, the back pressure of the hose. I messed up. I think it was the second or third day of school. I got in late, 5 minutes late. So in the pit where we practiced duck walking, it was gravel. And if you kneeled on the gravel, it would dig into your knees. And that's why they did it that way, to teach you to stay up. And I would have to shovel all the gravel back into the pit during my lunch hour. That was my punishment for being late, The Probie school started off with PT. You got in, you we went into the locker room, got squared away, and they had us, you ran a mile, eventually you got up to 3. You did your push-ups, sit-ups, all your calisthenics, pull-ups, and they kept a log on what you did. And you had to improve by the time Proby school ended, or you weren't getting out of Proby school. They expected you to improve your scores. They had us change outside. So after PT, you're all hot, sweaty, strip down outside and get in your clothes, even though it was cold. Because the lesson was, this is your new life. You're not going to be comfortable and warm and all that. You're going to be miserable. So get used to it. And that was how it was going to be. So you had like a half hour for lunch, and then you went back into the classrooms, and they had the day separated into evolutions where you got your gear and you did something, and then you had classroom work. And it just depended on how the schedule fell, what you were doing, morning or afternoons. And the 100-man company was divided into 2 platoons, and we had 4 squads, and very military regimented, and you had 2 DIs for each squad, and they followed you through your training. And some of the classes had separate instructors, and some of it was the DIs would be teaching. And it was good. It was good. I got hurt in Proby school. We were doing a 35-foot ladder drill, and this one guy was farting around, and he dropped the ladder, and it ripped my leg open. Even though the boot was on, the impact of that heavy metal ladder just ripped my leg open right down my shin bone. So I knew it hurt, but I didn't want to look at it in front of anybody. So after the class was over, we went in and we got changed, and I made sure I stayed behind because I realized my boot was full of blood. And it was like a 4-inch long gash. I'm like, what the hell am I going to do now? If I go on sick call, you're going to get kicked out of school. We waited so long to get in. Unless you were going to cut my leg off, I was not going on sick call. So I got a bunch of socks and I tied it over the cut and finished up the day, went home, and couldn't go to a doctor because if they put stitches on it, you wouldn't be able to run. It would tear. So I just taped it up with gauze and band-aids and tape and whatever I could do, and just dealt with it. And one of the other kids caught me, this kid Myers, he was from the Bronx. He was like, holy shit, man, that's really bad. And he helped me tape it up one day because it had opened up. It had a rough bunch of evolutions or whatever, and it had ripped open again. And it would not heal. It just would not heal. And I think it happened on a Tuesday, so come Friday, it might have scabbed up enough that it was only bleeding a little bit. But I never told anybody, and he kept the secret. He could have, gone to the instructors, man, this guy's messed up. But he kept it, and that was really good of him. And I had met this one fireman. They had, at the academy, you have different schools running all the time. One of them was the chauffeur school. And I had met this one guy. He was in ladder training school to be a chauffeur. And he worked, it turns out, in the neighborhood my family used to live in, called Crown Heights in Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh man, I wish I could go and, hang out with you guys. He goes, well, I'm working Saturday. Why don't you come? So I went to the firehouse, and he said, bring your gear. Who knows? Maybe you'll, ride along or something. and the lieutenant let me ride along. So I stayed with this guy and went to two fires,
Nice.
and no mask, you know, and that was cool. And I would do that like every Saturday. I would go and I'd ride with him. I wanted to get into that house because that's where my family lived, and interviewed with the captain of the engine company because at the time that we were getting out of Proby school, they had just passed a rule all Probies had to go to engine companies. We had just lost the fifth of five new Probies who were in trucks who had gotten killed, and they didn't want that happening anymore. They figured, let's teach them some survival skills in the engines, and then eventually they can go to the trucks. So we all had to go to engine companies, and the captain of engine 280 was like, "Well, everybody says you're good, you're into the job, so yeah, I'll take you." And I was all happy, but I didn't get the place. All the mucky chief sons took the open spots in that firehouse. It was a busy firehouse, so they got all the good spots.
Nepotism is ever present.
Yeah, tons of that. I had no family on the job, a couple of friends, but no family, and definitely a father-son pass-along type career, and that's what happened in this case. And so
So what? So you didn't have any family because fire department is inherently a lot of very family based tradition. What drew you to the fire department?
well, I going back a few years, I was nominated to the Naval Academy, and I thought I was going to get in. And at the last minute, supposedly some of my paperwork was missing, so I didn't get the appointment. So I didn't know what to do. And a week later, the Marines contacted me, and they were like, you want to serve and you want to be a pilot, you could be a pilot for the Marine Corps. And I had forgotten that the Marines had the Air Wing. So I had to go take their tests. I passed all of them. And they were like, you're in the program, but you have to go to college. We don't take people out of high school for officers or pilots. You have to go to college. So I went to a college night and had my transcript, and a couple of friends I knew went to the school, Oswego College, and they looked at the transcripts, and they were like, "Oh yeah, you're in, no problem." And I was in like a pre-med type program, and my advisor after the first year was like, "You're not doing too good. If you expect to get into a medical program, your grades have to go way up, or you're going to have to do something to show them that you're really into this kind of work." And he suggested I join a rescue squad as a volunteer, and that's what I did. And in doing that, you get to know the firemen, and eventually one of them said to me one night, "Hey, you want to do something crazy?" And I'm like, I'm 19 years old. Yeah, of course I'll do something crazy. And he goes, "Come in with me into this fire, and I'll show you what we do." And that's when I realized, wow, this is pretty wild. That's what I think I'm going to want to do. So I didn't go back into the Marine program, and I was doing everything I could for the fire service to get a career. I joined up as a volunteer. I went to the state schools, went to Niagara Mohawk, because Oswego is upstate New York. Niagara Mohawk had fire schools. You learned how to put out electrical fires, transformer fires, and all that kind of stuff. And so I was ready and willing, sent out my resumes before college ended, and every city that I sent to had the same requirement. You have to move here and become a resident, and then we'll hire you. Well, Well, New York had, I think it was in 77, they had the written test for the New York Fire Department. And I had to go all the way down to the city from Oswego to take the test. And I believe there was something like 90,000 kids that took the test. And say only about 45,000 scored at a level that they would accept. So that cut half of them out. And then in 78 was the physical test to get into the fire department. And that cut out probably 25,000 people because they couldn't pass the physical test. The physical test started with a 120-pound dummy lift and carry up 2 flights of stairs around the obstacle course and then back down. And you had to lay the victim down. You couldn't throw them, couldn't drop them. If you did that, you lost points. And you were timed. You had to do it in a certain timeline. Then they had a hand grip test. They had a 2-minute pull-up. You had to hang, and they would accept to that point. Once you got to that point, the clock stopped. So you had to hang there, and it's tough, man. Your arms start shaking, and then they had a standing broad jump, agility course. You had to walk an 1.5-inch board, 30 feet, with an old air pack that was steel, weighed 45 pounds. And you had to go down this board, hit the buzzer, and then come back without falling off. It was a lot to the test, checking out all the different aspects of your physical abilities. During the agility part, I remember there was an 8-foot wall, and you had to jump up. A standing jump, you couldn't do a running jump. They only allowed you 2 steps, and then jump up, pull yourself up, flip over it, and continue on the class. And then they ended with a mile run. I think I did it in like 5:05 or something. It was a good time. It really helped me with my score. But the women that signed up, none of them passed that test. So they sued, and the judge, who was a liberal appointee from Carter, was, oh yeah, that's definitely wrong. That test is too hard. So that's how we got held up from getting into the pro school for a year. I lost a year because of him. And then the fire department had to hire them anyway. And other physical tests that followed were changed to make it easier for women to pass. And I don't know how you guys are in your department, but you need standards. You can't operate without standards. And now that we all know that there are good women candidates, especially the athletic ones, they can do these tests. But the general female, if she's not trained physically, not passing these tests, it's just too hard. The work is too hard. You know because you do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that was all part of the lead in to get into the academy, and then eventually, we got through it, and then we went into the field, and I got assigned to Engine 14, which was in the Flatiron District in Lower Manhattan, roughly from 23rd Street down to 8th Street was our response area. And part of the response area contained what was called Hell's 100 Acres, which was lofts that were built during the Civil War. Extremely dangerous buildings. The fire department had lost, I'm going to say, when I got on, they had lost 780 guys in the 100 years got on, and it went up probably to 820 before 9/11. We we had lost 40, I think it was 44 guys during my 20 years before 9/11, and almost all the companies with heavy losses, like Engine 14, was because of those old lofts. They were pretty much all based out of Lower Manhattan. All the companies had lost a lot of guys, and one of the buildings in our area was the 23rd Street fire. That was Engine 14 was first due to it, and the original call came in from 22nd Street, and 14 and ladder 3 went to 22nd Street, and they couldn't find the fire. They knew it was close, but they couldn't find it. And after about 20 minutes, the chief sent everybody around to 23rd Street, figuring it's in one of those buildings. And they took 3 truck with them. And once they got on the 23rd Street side, the chief that was in charge was giving out assignments. And, ladder 7, engine 18, you go into the store. Engine 5, ladder 3, you go into that store, but I want you in the cellar. Engine 33, you go into this store. And that simple, giving assignments decided who was going to live and who was going to die. Because 18 engine and ladder 7 were the guys that ended up walking onto the weakened floor and then falling into the fire. And that was a common issue in Manhattan because the buildings are so old. Do you guys deal with a lot of cellars and subcellars?
Not a whole lot, and the reason is because of the clay here in I guess as you get into North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, there's not a whole lot of basements because it's harder to dig into the clay.
Yep. You need power tools to do that. They didn't have those 100 years ago. Everything was dug by hand. So yeah, that would make sense. We had tons of underground stuff that we had to deal with, and it was very challenging. This one guy that I knew, Carl Oreggia, super guy from Engine 33. He had been a dispatcher before he got in the fire department, and he knew everything about the FD, every box, who was going, and he said the most manly fire is a subcellar fire. He goes, that's when you're really going to see who the firemen are and who's playing.
And the reason you're saying that is because that heat is just trapped in there.
Yes.
It's low, and you have to crawl basically on your back, on your legs, and on you're moving down on your back down the stairs.
You're sliding down those stairs as fast as you can, because what's happening is all the heat and the fire are trying to go up those stairs, and you have to stay below the heat line or you're going to get burnt. And going into a cellar is bad enough, but going into a subcellar is even worse, because there is absolutely no chance of escape. If you go down in a subcellar, chances are you're going to be dead. And that he used to call it the most manly fire that you could go to. And he was right. They were tough. I had a couple of them. They were really, really tough.
What was your first assignment? What was your first house?
Engine 14 was the first house, and reported there when the fire prevention TDY was ended. And you show up at the firehouse with all your gear, introduce yourself to everybody. The officer in charge gives you your what's called a group number, and you have 25 groups on our chart. So whatever group number you're in, you'll be working with the guys in that group area. And the officer that was in that group was the captain. So I was going to be working under the captain pretty much my whole time. And Engine 14 was a medium activity company. Um, we were in Battalion 6, Division 1, and the northernmost company of Division 1. And the work, the fire duty that was close to us was in the Lower East Side, which was a little bit to our southeast. And the fire activity had been very heavy, I would say, going back to 64, 1964. And the original company that was in that type of environment was Engine 17 and Ladder 18. And they were so busy that the only building on their block that was still standing was the firehouse. All the other buildings had burned down. That's how busy they were. So as they were deep into Lower East Side, so as the work moved north, it was getting into 14's area. And Engine 33, Ladder 9 was on East 3rd and the Bowery. Ladder 3 was 13th and 3rd. Engine 5 was 14th and 1st. Ladder Ladder 3 was second due and first due into Lower East Side. 33 and 9 were first and second due into Lower East Side. And Engine 5, was first and second. So those companies were all busier than we were. And 5 Engine was so busy that they were in the top 25 since 1970. That's how busy they were. 14 was on the outskirts, so we would go in on third due, fourth due, second alarms. But so we got some work, but not to the level that those guys were getting. And I was lucky. I caught fires my first, I think, 6 tours, which was unusual. And the first night we went third due to a fire in Greenwich Village. It was a tenement that was raised like 5 steps up to get to the front door, which meant you had a basement that was usable. And in this case, the basement was a freaking store. So now you're going down into the store full of merchandise, and fire, and you're going down. So that was my introduction to the downside fires. Second night, we caught first due a restaurant fire, and I picked up the nickname Black Cloud because all of a sudden, 14 that doesn't get much work, it's starting to get work. And that happened, the next 4 tours that I worked. And it would happen, probably every other tour after that, I was getting something. I remember one night we were going to have dinner, and we cooked in the firehouse in New York. I don't know if you guys do that. But in New York, we cooked. So we were going to have a nice dinner, and just as we were sitting down, the radio goes off, and the dispatcher is calling Battalion 6, and it's a box that we are, I think, 3rd or 4th due on. So if it's going to be something, we're going to be going. And the lieutenant that was working at night, he didn't like me, so he was shaking his head already. And sure enough, 5 Engine gets in. It's 1075. It's a working fire, and I think 33 Engine was the 3rd engine. So everybody's trying to start shoveling the food in, and then Battalion 6 shows up, and they go, extra engine and truck. We got medium fire on, say, the fourth floor, and we're going. And the lieutenant throws his, you know, fork down. He's cursing me out, and we get on the rig, and I don't even think we got 100 feet from the firehouse when the battalion calls up and goes, "Give me a second alarm. We have fire on 2 floors, of the tenement." And lieutenant turns around. He's cursing me out, and this one fireman that was on my side of the rig, he was a black guy, funny guy, and he was Navy, ex-Navy. And he looks at me and he goes to the other two guys. He goes, "I don't like this new." He goes, "Every time he's here, we're going to something. We just left this great dinner behind. We're never going to get back to it, because these kind of fires turn into an all-nighter. You didn't get relief when I got on the job. You went to the fire. It was your fire. They didn't call relief units. They would call a second alarm, but those guys, for the most part, if they weren't needed, they put them back in service because there was so much fire duty going on that they couldn't tie guys up. So this was you. You were there all night.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure you do a good job. And I would say we got back at probably like 2, 3 in the morning.
Was this during the winter or?
That particular fire was a couple months in, so I'm gonna say it was probably like springtime of '81. So it was cold, but it wasn't horrendous like it had been.
Right.
Yeah.
And the thing about that you're talking about being there all night, because I understand, like, it's great for the first couple minutes when you're slaying the I mean, when you're getting after it. After that, it is dirty, gritty, just like the old war horse had told you. He said that's the dirty, gritty when you gotta go in there and you gotta find every little. You're picking out every little hot spot and
overhauling like crazy because the old tenements, they had lath and plaster walls and ceilings.
Mm-hmm.
And if you had a decent fire condition, you had to pull the ceilings apart.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd be in there yanking these ceilings down for an hour, depending on how much fire you had. Taking the trim off the windows, doors was fairly easy, especially with the Halligan tool that we had. I don't know if you guys used that.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
But yeah, that came from a battalion chief from Battalion 6 in the 30s. He developed that tool.
Hugh Halligan.
Yeah, Hugh Halligan. That's right. And you could tell you had a tough fire because at the end of it, my hands would hurt from using tools for like 2 hours straight. You knew you had a tough fire. And yeah, like you said, everything had to be put out. You couldn't leave anything behind. They really, really had a hard on if you had a rekindle. The game plan in New York was there was no reason to do that. You stay until it's done. And in the old days, they had the truck companies clean up. So to help the homeowners out or the apartment, they would shovel all the lath and plaster into buckets and take it downstairs. And they did a lot of what was called salvage work. That was part of the job until everything got crazy in the 60s. And then they had to stop doing it because it was tying the companies up. They needed them back in service. The old timers, they used all 2.5. There was no 1.75, no 1.5. The only small line on a rig was the booster line, which was a 1-inch rubber line, and they used that for rubbish and car fires. But everything was 2.5. And then I think it was around 1970 they introduced the 1.75 because the 2.5 was too debilitating. Plus, it was kind of doing a lot of water damage. 2.5 throws out a huge amount of water, so they went to the faster hoses that were easier to stretch, and so that's what we broke into mostly was 1.75, unless you had a commercial fire, and then it was automatically a 2.5. And if you were going into a cellar fire, you took a 2.5, because chances are nobody's getting down there to help you. So if you don't have enough water, goodbye. So you took a 2.5 down into cellars. Um, so yeah, we got back from that one, and you know, the other guys were laughing about it. They thought it was hysterical because we were catching work. That lieutenant, man, he was just mad as hell because he had been a fireman, I guess, in like 1950 in Bed-Stuy, and a lieutenant in Bed-Stuy. He was done. He didn't want any more fires. He was like, he just didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
And
Well,
a
you
lot of
could
those guys,
see some of the older guys. Like I'm, meeting guys now that have been on, 15, 20 years, and they're enjoying the outskirt stations and not the inner city stations that are getting,
yes,
every little. Well, I know you guys didn't run. I know New York City runs med calls now, but every little med call, every little, they're like, man, who cares now? Like, you know what I mean? I've done my time. They can
right,
keep it. These young guys can keep it.
right. When you're young, you're full of piss and vinegar, and you want to
Yeah.
do all this. And then, yeah, you're right. Around 15 years, guys are like, oh man. And in my time, it was even earlier. Around 10 years, guys were
Well,
burned out.
you had a faster pace. You know.
Yeah, yeah. And I think 14 Engine was doing 2,500 runs a year at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're doing over 5,000,
Mm-hmm.
and the majority of it is EMS. 14 is one of the busier companies now in the city. Um, all the companies that I worked with in that area have all gone crazy with runs. Um, I mean, it's just insane. They were all medium or even less than medium running companies. 16 engine, 3 engine, 1 engine, and now they're all doing over 5,000, sometimes 6,000 calls. So yeah, they got really nuts. Um, and then you came back, and you'd have to run the hoses up the hose tower because they had to dry.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on what the officers wanted to do, you could spend an hour pulling hose up the hose tower and then lowering other hoses down to refit the bed. That was a standard practice until the 60s. And when they got busy, they just couldn't do it. But some of the officers still had you do that. And that one lieutenant, he was one of those. He would have you run up the hose. And that's why all the old firehouses were 3 stories.
Mm.
They were all built in the day when they didn't have a rubber jacket.
Mm-hmm.
So they had to take care of the hose or it would rot. You couldn't just put it back in the hose bed. So you brought it back to quarters, put it up the hose tower, and got dry stuff and put it back on.
And putting that, and I just want to clarify that process of putting that hose back on the truck. That's a lengthy process because you got to lay it out. You got to lay the couplings. You got to lay them out right so they don't get caught. Because if they get caught when you're laying a line, if you wrap a hydrant and you're laying a line, and that gets hung up, that's a mess.
Yeah, it's a big mess. Luckily in New York, we didn't have to do too much of those lay-ins because hydrants, there was usually 4 per block. So
There was one close enough to where it was.
Yeah, you would take. I was to the mindset that even if this hydrant is before the building, I don't care. We see it, test it. If it works, hook up. I don't care if you have to stretch 2 or 3 extra lengths of hose down the sidewalk. I want to make sure we have water. So that was my mindset. And I would have the guys grab a hydrant before we got to the building. A lot of companies didn't do that. They would pull up to the building, grab the hose, and take off in the hope that the next hydrant was there. But in New York, it was common for them to be knocked over or vandalized. So if you did that, now you got to go even further to find water, and you'd pull out the whole bed trying to find water. So I did it the other way. I would be like, "No, this is good enough. We're within, a couple lengths. Stop here.
Mm-hmm.
Let the trucks have the front of the building, and we'll just pull those. I don't care."
Yeah, so somebody's got to get out, and one of the guys on the back has got to get out, wrap the hydrant, and driver
Right.
drives on,
Yeah.
hook it up,
Yeah.
driver calls for water, and then
Yeah.
you're good to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hopefully.
That's
Most likely you're good to go.
I forget if they call that the flying stretch. I think that's what it was called. Yeah, I wouldn't even do that. I would just say keep the rig here on the hydrant.
Yeah.
We'll stretch the line down to the fire. I don't. I want to keep the front of the building open for the trucks, and you
Yeah,
can always
gotcha.
pull those, but you can't move a ladder truck.
Yeah, that's. Tell me
We
about
always-
the importance of that. I'm thinking of this from the average person's point of the truck. You mean you're talking about the ladder truck with like, what did they have? 100-foot ladder?
Yeah, the ladder was rated at 100 feet, and with the turntable, it was roughly 110.
Mm-hmm.
So, and depend also how close you got to the building.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if the angle was really tight, you could get 11 stories.
Mm-hmm.
Tough climb, but you could do it, you know. And the tower ladders that we had in the city at my time were only 75 footers. So a lot of times they couldn't even get to a roof. You were lucky if they could get to the top floor. The city, I don't know why they went with 75s and not 85s, but that's what they went with. And then eventually they started buying 95-foot tower ladders because they realized the shortcomings, that the 75 isn't getting to these 6 and 7-story tenements, Maybe they figured they could still use the ladder pipes because when I was in ladder 3, we used a ladder pipe a few times. But yeah, so getting back to 14 engine, everything was pretty good, but I wanted more work. One of the bad things that we had at 14, I had come in for my night tour, and it was in the summer of '81, and they had a pier fire on the west side. And the pier had come in around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So companies on the west side and 14 were sent to that fire because 14, like ladder 3, responded river to river. Most of the units in Manhattan were north-south. The 14, 3, and a couple other companies, they went river to river, in addition to go north. So they had a bigger area. So they got on to the pier. They put most of it out, but not all of it. And the mayor, Koch, had sent in a warning, no overtime. I won't approve any overtime. So the chief told everybody to take up before the fire was out, that he would have the night crew come back and finish it off. So they all left, and they were getting into the firehouse. I guess it was around 5:30, and our change of tours was 6 o'clock. 1,800 hours was the change of tours. So guys were, oh man, that pier was sucked. It was tough, but it ain't done. And they were like, look down the street, and we could see the cloud. It's not out. This guy sent us all home to save overtime. So the captain had come in, as always, and he was mad as hell because he had been to pier fires in his career. He definitely did not want another one, and he was just fuming. So we got, our gear together. It was 1,800, and just he's about to do roll call, we get a call for a fire on like 30th Street in a store. So we're like, oh, good. We go to the store fire. We won't have to go to the pier. And just before we got there, the dispatchers called. 14, you're being redirected back to the pier fire. And the captain was like punching the roof of the rig. He was so mad. And we went to the pier and we stood there because it was rush hour. So the hydrants were all on the roadway. So we couldn't stretch a line across because they wouldn't shut down the highway. It's rush hour. We can't shut this thing down for that crappy old pier. So we didn't get back on it till, I'm going to say, 6:45 is when we got back on it. And the fire wasn't on the pier anymore. It was under the pier. It had burned its way through the decking and was now into the pilings of the pier. And in New York, they had little baby manholes, and you would pop them open, and that's where you put the under pier nozzles and stuff, or regular nozzles to try and put the fire out. But it was an inefficient system because you could never get enough water in there. And it was 18 engine, 14 engine, and 3 engine, and 3 truck and 12 truck. And we stretched, I'm going to say, 400 feet, 500 feet onto this pier.
And these piers are huge.
Yeah, they're like 700 feet long.
Is this a big like concrete pier?
It's wooden pier.
It's wooden? Okay.
Yeah, wooden pier. And it had a superstructure, which was wood and metal, you know. And so we're popping off these manholes, dropping the hose in, hitting the fire for a few minutes, go to another one, and just bouncing around with the 3 engine companies. But the chief, and it was the same chief that had the fire earlier, he had us put the hoses between the fire and the back of the pier instead of the fire and the 500 feet we just walked. So he was protecting the wrong part of the pier. And all you basically did was push the fire downstream. And other companies were showing up and went to a second alarm, then a third alarm. And the captain had told us a couple things. Number one, boots rolled down. Do not put your boots up. If you fall overboard, the boots will fill with water and you're going right to the bottom and you're dead. The other thing he said is no mask. We'll put the mask over here because we're going to need them to get out of here. Because you can see how much worse this is from an hour ago. So no mask.
Because he knew how bad this was going to be.
Yeah,
he'd been to
he knew how
before.
bad this was going to get. Yeah, he knew how bad. So he said, we're going to need these to get out of here. And I remember getting sick from the smoke and throwing up. You know, I went off. We took a break for like 5 minutes. I hurled my guts. We went back out, and I got the feeling that there wasn't as many guys on this part of the pier. And it turned out that the 2 trucks and 3 engine had left, along with a couple other companies. So it was just 14 and 18 on this pier alone. And, you know, we've been on here, I'm going to say an hour and a half now. And my partner was this guy, Al Lipschitz, real funny guy, you know, Brooklyn Jew, real funny guy. He was a enlisted Marine, so we had a lot of laughs. And we go to put the nozzle into this manhole, and a blast of fire shoots out like coming out of a jet engine and shot right past our heads, almost took our heads off. We're like, what the hell's going on? And we left that one and went to another one, and all of a sudden 100 feet of fire came out from under the pier and rolled over us and went into the superstructure. And Al and I are looking up, holy shit. And we dropped the line and we started to run, and the pier collapsed. And it only dropped maybe 3 inches, but it felt like 3 miles. And I said to myself, and I kind of said it to Al, the best we can hope for is we're going swimming. And we were like freaking cats. We shot off of that collapsed section. And I said to Al, I don't want to play here no more, man. I'm done. And he goes, let's tell the captain. So we grab him, and he's another old war horse from the bad times.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you two dopes, what do you know? So we drag him back to where we were, and he sees that 20-foot section that had dropped. And now the fire is coming around where it had dropped. And it's white hot. And he's like, holy shit. Game's over, boys. And out we go. He gets the other crews, 18, let's get off this pier. So we head to the rear of the pier, and he reports into the command that the pier's collapsing. They can't get us off. Fireboats are tied up, trying to hit the fire, and they can't get us off. So we're out there for another, 10 minutes, and I'm still throwing up, and they tell the officers, go and get your equipment, get your hoses, because you're going to need it to defend yourself, because we can't catch you. And we're like, man, frig this sucks, So we have to go back in to get the hoses, and we're trying to drag them, but you have to watch where you're walking because the pier's collapsing. And then parts of the superstructure start falling. Kaboom, boom, boom, all around us. And that was it, man. We gave up. So we went to the rear of the pier, and if you look down the side, there was at least 300 feet or more burning of this pier. And now it's the superstructure also. So like where we were was all on fire. It's all lit up now.
So now are you on the water side, or did you get back towards?
Trapped on the water.
So you got pier fire, and then you got the water behind you.
We have about 75 feet of pier, maybe 100 feet, that's still not burning.
Mm-hmm.
That we're on, but there's no way off this pier unless a boat comes to get us. So.
So you about did go swim. You about did go swimming then.
Yeah, we were thinking about it because this thing was really chewing up the inside of that pier. Everything was lit off now. It was a flashover, and now it's heading towards us because it's got fresh stuff to burn. The only saving grace was that there was a slight breeze inland, so it was kind of driving the fire towards the city itself. So the officers kept us in one place, and they kept yelling to these chiefs, and the chiefs didn't want to break the fireboat because the fireboats are the only thing keeping us from losing the whole pier. Well, I got news for you, pal. You're not saving this pier. Anyhow, break out the dynamite. Now, New York has a rule. The fire commissioner can order the demolition of buildings to stop the spread of fire. And they used to do that. Before you had radios, tower ladders, and all the modern firefighting, they wouldn't hesitate to blow up a building if they thought it would be a fire break, So I'm going to say another half hour went by before they finally sent a fireboat to get us. And, I would say we were probably down to our last 50 feet of pier at this point. And so we get on the boat, and they tell us that you're part of our crew. So we're going to have hose lines every 10 feet. And you guys are going to operate these hose lines. So we form up 4 nozzle teams, and with the deck guns and the monitors on the fireboat, we're like strafing the fire because they don't want to stay too close because they're afraid the damn thing's going to collapse. So we're hitting it. Another hour or so goes by, and my body has had enough, and I'm dehydrated. I'm throwing up constantly, and I pass out. And they leave me where I am. I'm not, in anybody's way, so they leave me where I am. And I remember one of the engineers like, man, that kid looks as green as the water, And they eventually decide they should drop me off and get me some medical care. So they pull up, dragged me off, and the idea of medical care in the fire department was an old school bus, and the doctor's like looking at you. Yeah, I don't think he's gonna die. Let's keep him on the bus. And I'm still thrown up, and I'm just about done, man. I'm gonna pass out again. And finally, the aide for the medical officer goes, "I got to tell you, Doc, I've seen this kid looks like he's gonna croak. We've got to get him out of here." So they finally approve putting me in an ambulance, and they take me to St. Vinny's Hospital. And I'm in the hospital, and I'm kind of out of it, They give you the IVs, they're putting you on oxygen, steroid oxygen, to try and help your lungs. And I go up to the intensive care, and I'm up there, and there's another guy, same boat, he's from I think ladder 12 and or engine 3, something like that. And I guess like an hour or so goes by, probably like 3 in the morning at this point, and there's this terrible screaming, and I lift my head up and I look over. This little boy is in the ICU with us. It's a big ward. He's burned over 90% of his body. His mom got mad at him, took a pot, boiling water, and dumped it over this poor kid. And his skin is hanging off him. And, we're just sitting there watching them try and treat his burns. And the kid is just screaming. That was a real wake-up call to the deprivations of New York. We had seen some of it during our, medical calls and the arson and all this, but that was my real wake-up call, watching this poor kid endure hours of this torment. And they bandaged him up as best they could, and I kind of went back to sleep, and I think it was around 0700 I woke up. He was gone. He had died. So I was like, man, I'd like to get my hands on that woman, give her a taste of her own medicine, And that was a common thing in New York. 8-9 million people. There's a couple 100,000 that are pretty nuts, and they do a lot of bad things. So I was in the hospital, I guess, like 48 hours. And then I went home, and they order you into the medical office the next morning. All right, go back to work. That was, one time off, go back to work. That's how it was. Back then. They didn't want to spend a dime on you if they didn't have to, And the pier burned, I think it was for 3 days. And one of the Department of Engineers of the city showed up, and he was screaming at the chiefs, "Do you realize that all of the west side of Manhattan is built on wooden pilings like that pier? If this fire gets past you, the entire city's going to burn. You're going to have fires breaking out in places you never even dreamed of." So what they did is they had all the rescues come in. They all got out their jackhammers, and they cut a 10-foot trench across this pier. And they had every hose and deck gun they could get dumping water to stop the fire from crossing over. And that's how they contained it to that part of the pier. Otherwise, it would have gotten into the West Side Highway, and who knows what else is built. Because there are buildings in Manhattan built on pilings just like Venice. People don't know that, but they're there. Because a lot of Manhattan was landfill. Matter of fact, the Trade Center, and you have the area next to the Trade Center. That never existed. The that was the fill from when they built the Trade Center. So they didn't know what to do with it. It was like, 10,000 truckloads. What are we going to do with
Mm-hmm.
this? So this one engineer says, why don't we build a cofferdam and dump it in there and make some new land
Mm-hmm.
that the Port Authority also owned. So that's what they did.
That's why, and David and I, our engineer, he used to live in the Bronx, and we were talking about the the buildings and how if you look at the way the buildings sort of the skyline, and if you look at where it dips and all like the just the housing,
Oh,
the lower
yeah.
as you get towards like mid, I don't know, south, as you're getting towards
We're
southern
14th,
Manhattan,
and yeah, we're
it's
14th.
lower, and that's because that's where the landfill is, and it's the
Yep,
slab. You can't build those big
that's
structures on it
right.
like you can
That's right.
north of Central Park. So,
Yep. Yep. You have that one stretch in Midtown where you can build high rise, and you have that, the Upper East Side and Washington Heights,
mm,
and there's a certain area of Lower Manhattan that can do it. But yeah, that's why you have those dips and curves because it's it's just too soft. It won't
mm,
take the weight. Um, Now, when they built the Trade Center, they had to build a concrete wall around the perimeter because it was all like a fill type area,
mm,
and that was used to keep the Hudson River from leaching its way into the cellars. They had to build that slurry wall out of concrete and grout, and it was called the bathtub, and it worked. They actually were scared during 9/11 that that wall would collapse, and then the Hudson River would come in. That would be the end of Manhattan. What a catastrophe that would have been
wow,
if that no one knows about it. But um, all the subways that ran into that area would have flooded.
mm,
You never would have been able to stop the flood because it would coming in from the river, and would have gotten into buildings. I mean, the PATH train to Jersey. Oh, what a catastrophe that would have been.
mm,
But they did a good job building that wall, so it held up. Yeah. But yeah, so that pier fire was quite a nightmare. And the FD has a magazine called WNYF, where with New York firefighters, and they would always run articles on these crazy fires. There was no article on that pier because of the fact that it started because the chief didn't want overtime. If he had left the companies there, they would have put that out and it would have been over. But to save the city a couple $100 in overtime costs, ended up costing the city probably 20 million
mm.
because it burned for 3 days. So, um, the work in 14 was okay, but it just wasn't enough for me. So I had
Of course,
my friend.
you
What's
were
that?
18 at this time, 19.
What's that?
Were you 18 or 19 around this time?
No, I was 22 when I got
22.
into the fight. Yeah, 22. Yeah, I was I think 19 when I was a volunteer
Okay.
up in Oswego.
That's right,
Yeah,
because you had done the squad work for
yeah,
a little bit there,
right.
and you would have had to have been
Uh,
of age. Yeah.
Now my buddy from Crown Heights, we talked all the time, and he knew, that I wanted to do more fire duty, and he tells me, he goes to a friend of mine who's the captain of 40 truck in West Harlem. He's got 2 or 3 guys getting promoted. He's going to need you know, some aggressive new meat. So why don't you go up and talk to him? So I did, and this guy's name was Butler. He went on to become like an assistant chief. He he was like, because of Jerry's recommendation and the way you seem to be, I'll definitely take you. Just put your paper in and you're in. I'll actually have you brought up on what's called an onion skin prior to your official transfer. So I ran back to 14 and typed up the report, gave it to the lieutenant, and the lieutenant had a stroke. He goes, "You think you're getting out of here?" There is not a chance in hell you're getting out of here. You know, the captain is tired of you young guys running to try and go to busy places. You're not leaving. I'm telling you right now. So the captain comes in. You know, I'm working with him again tonight. Right in front of me, rips it right up. He goes, "You ain't going nowhere." And I was mad as hell. You know, I was like, "Damn." So, and to make sure, he even called the battalion and told the battalion what he did. And the battalion was like, I could hear him on the phone. "All right, Cap, it's your company. You want to keep him? He stays." So, a couple months later, I was down in the Keys on a scuba trip with that guy Jerry and a few other guys. And this one guy comes over and he goes, "You're in 14 engine?" I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "Your captain got lifted. They had a fight in the firehouse last night, and he got lifted. So he's out." I'm like, "Man, he ripped my paper up 2 months ago, and now he's gone." You know, and the other guy up in 40 truck, he filled those openings so that, you know, they weren't there anymore.
Oh man, so you missed your window.
Yeah, yeah, I missed it. So, the new captain that came in, you know, a lot of guys knew who he was. Good guy. He had to talk with me. He goes, "Listen, I know you're itching to go, but I want you to stay. Give me like 6 to 9 months. You know, help me train these new probies that we're getting, because the 10-year mark, guys were trying to escape. They wanted to go to Staten Island. They didn't want to, or East Queens. They didn't want to work anymore, and it was happening all over Manhattan, not just 14 engine. You know, guys that had 10 or so years, they wanted out. They were done, and you know, they were tired of the fires, the running and stuff, so they just wanted to go hang out for the last, you know, few years. So
Because
got like
as you listen to the older guys talk, you know the wear and tear on you, and some of them it's even funnier because as they get to like a slower station, they'll say like, "Man, I didn't even realize what I was. Why didn't I do this like a year ago? Why didn't I do this 3 years ago? Oh my gosh!"
Yep, it's true, because you get so used to what you're doing, you know, like in
Your
Manhattan.
brain, it just kind of focuses and it like resets
Yes,
to this mode, and this is what we do. But you
yep,
don't. Your body has a different.
right,
After a
different
while,
effort.
it's only going to take so much of
Yeah,
that
yeah,
survival mode.
yeah. And one of the quickest ways to change a firehouse is if the workload goes up, because you'll find out very quickly who is a fireman and who is not anymore or never was. Because once the work starts picking up and they're having to face the Red Devil, you'll see it real fast. They'll be putting papers in. They don't want no part of it. And I always liked dealing with the Red Devil, and I liked being in companies that wanted to go to fires. So I always looked for that. Um, but yeah, these guys were definitely on their way out. One of them, we had caught a fire. Let's say like 25th Street, Second Avenue, or something like that. We should have been second due. No way we should have got in first. But the first due, for whatever reason, was slow. We had some really good MPOs in 14 that were really quick, and boom, you're out the door. And with the captain and that other lieutenant going, and we got new officers, they were faster. You know, they still wanted to do work, so they were good. Um, so we're zipping through the streets, and we get in first due, and you could see the glow in the front door of this tenement. So you knew there's something burning inside, and we jump off, we stretch, and we go down the hallway, and the MPO has water, and boom, 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 we're in there. And um, an order had come down that they didn't want water damage. So they wanted, you had the main tip on the nozzle for firefighting, and you had a small tip for overhaul. They wanted that small tip to be used. They were tired of the water damage. So the rule was keep the small tip on the nozzle. This way, it's always there. The guy who eventually transferred out, he didn't know it, the rule, and he didn't check the nozzle. First thing that I always did when you got in, check the mass and check the hose bed to make sure the hoses are laid out right. They have a nozzle. It works. Because the worst thing that can happen is you stretch into a building and you go to pull that handle and it's broken. So he never checked it. So now we're going into the blackness and it's hot, but it's not, hellacious. And he starts screaming, he's getting burned. He's got the nozzle getting burned. Get burned. So he goes diving over all of us. And, he goes out. And I think I had moved up to back up, and a probie had the nozzle. And we're having a hard time at this fire. I mean, it's not darkening down. It's really taking a long time. And Al is like punching me. What the hell is taking so long? It's just a tenement, And I'm like, I don't know, man. Something's wrong. There's something wrong. So the lieutenant's screaming for more pressure, and the truck is behind you they want to get in to do their searches, and eventually, we're able to get into the apartment. They're all fanning out, but there's fire all over the place, and it's not darkening down. It takes us a long time. So we finally, finish up. We're standing off against the wall, out of the way while the trucks are running around, and I look over at the nozzle. The outer tip is still on it, on the nozzle. We were throwing out the amount of water you do on a garden hose. That's what the little tip does. And I looked at Hal. I said, "You ain't gonna believe this, And he looks up. He flips out. And the other guy was a senior guy. We couldn't say nothing to him. So the lieutenant was pissed. Everybody was pissed. So we took the OST off real fast so the chief wouldn't see it. But that's why it took us 5 minutes to put out a fire that should have taken 2. It's those little things that mess you up, But he was ready to go, and he was one of the ones that left, and we got a bunch of new probies. And I made no bones about it that I was leaving, and we had caught enough work in the past. I did 2 years and 14, so at this point maybe it's like a year and 3/4. And the chiefs all knew me. They knew you wanted to perform, so they decided that I should go to ladder 3, because ladder 3 was going through the same purge. Guys were going to Queens. They're done 15, 18, 22 years. Some of the guys, like I said, they had been at the fire in 1966. So some of them had 25 years, 26 years. They were ready for a change. Let the new kids do all this. I'm tired. And the work in the Lower East Side was moving up into our area. So we were getting a lot of first due work in that area also. And my last fire in 14, it was like 3rd and 23rd. We get in first due again. And out of 3, it's right up our butt, and the people are coming out of this apartment house, and they're yelling and screaming. So it must be in here. So I think it was like a 6-story apartment house. So we're gonna hand stretch.
Mm-hmm.
And 3 goes in. I've already got the hose off because I had the nozzle that night. And all of a sudden they come down, and it's a loft on 23rd Street. That's where the fire is. It's not here. It's next door. So shades of 23rd Street all over again, right? Fire on 23rd Street. So we start down the sidewalk, and the original first due engine is in front of the building. So you're not going to have a fist fight with them, shit, you're fire. But what ends up happening is there's 3 floors burned. This homeless guy went broke into the building and decided to sleep in the staircase. And to keep warm, he set a fire, which ended up, because it's a wooden staircase in this old loft, is now burning in 3 floors. And Al and the black guy from 14 Engine, they were working in 3 truck that night, and they come down with this guy, and his skin is dragging behind him like a snake sheds their skin. And he's screaming up a storm as they drag him down the stairs.
Oh.
And I'm like, oh man, this guy's messed up. And a woman firefighter, this is her first major fire. And she's looking at that, her eyes are bugging out. I'm like, man, this is bad. So 16, I think, is on the 2nd floor. And they send us to the 3rd floor. And 5 Engine's going to go to the 4th floor. And because of the rescue that's going on, there's not many truck guys around. They're all busy. And this one guy shows up, and I'm like, Rich, we can't get in to the occupancy. You gotta, So he's working on this door, and the lieutenant's working on this little side door, and he gets it to pop open a little bit, and a wave of heat comes out. We're like, what the hell is this? And Rich gets the door open a little bit. I'm blasting away in this area. We don't know what the hell we're facing because it's all black. And we shut the door. We go in to the main door that Rich popped, and it's a machinist shop. There's machine tools all over the place. We're banging around, hitting fire, trying to move, and it was chaos. It was just chaos. But luckily, because we had 2.5, we were able to knock it down and put it out, and we saved the building, saved the exposures and all that. I think they ended up pulling out 5 people, because at this point in time, Manhattan, people were living in the lofts because they needed a place to live that was cheap, so they were illegally living in these factories, and nobody knew. It's worse today. There's people all over. We have people living in subcellars today because there's so many people, and most of them are illegals. They don't know where to go.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that was my last fire, and then I went to ladder 3.
Okay. I'm going to pause there and let the